today is Phil Posner, Doing Time in Mississippi, a Freedom Rider's Adventure. A congregational rabbi for nearly 40 years, Phil Posner has been active in social action and interfaith activities his entire adult life. In 1961, he joined the Freedom Rides, helping to integrate transportation facilities, and served 39 days in Parchman Penitentiary in Mississippi. He also participated in social action missions to El Salvador and Ethiopia, and is the co-founder with his friend Jane Fellman of the Rabbinic Network for Ethiopian Jewry. During the Vietnamese War, he created and led Riverside Cares, an organization that helped Vietnamese boat people. He has a degree in history from UCLA and was ordained in 1968. So let us welcome Phil Posner.
Is it on? Well, first of all, it's an honor to be here. Particularly grateful for some of the people who don't like to get up early. It's kind of sad for me to be here, as much as I'm delighted, because this is kind of Louise and I, a swan song. We leave Thursday for the States for 6 months and then Puerto Vallarta. So unfortunately, I won't be able to help with the Thanksgiving dinner, which was a lot of fun. So I hope that somebody volunteers for Jim to do that. We'll miss you all, and I particularly miss Open Circle and what goes on here. Such a long time ago, when I last embraced the young woman who cared enough to collect and put together for me a scrapbook of the news stories and historical events that described why 14 UCLA students and I spent part of our vacation in Mississippi, a place where racism and humidity coalesced to stifle freedom and arrest dissent. Alice titled the scrapbook Theme and Variation on a Summer Vacation, 1961 edition. President Kennedy had been in office 6 months, a time of hope and expectation, when I told Bob and Helen Singleton, only one of the 2 married couples that risked going on the ride, that I wanted to join them. A few days earlier, I had gone to my Rabbi Albert Lewis, alav shalom, peace unto him, to ask him what he thought of me going on the Freedom Ride. Tall, with a sermonic voice for social action, I admired Rabbi Lewis's passion for ethical monotheism, the idea that a belief in God, justice, and right behavior are inseparable. He did not quote my favorite prophet, Amos. Quote, remove from me the abundance of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harp. Just let justice roll down like the water, righteousness flow down like a mighty stream. He merely said, Phil, if I were in your shoes, I would go. The product of a liberal upbringing in white suburbia and minimal social contact with Negroes, as they were called then, I had not read any of M.L. King's philosophy of nonviolence, nor had I even heard of CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, when I signed on to the possibility of getting my head beaten in and said yes to 39 days in the Mississippi pen. What I will always remember prior to leaving LA for Jackson was our trading nonviolently to face what might come our way. We were taken to a nightclub near USC. I was 21 and a rabbinic student. And you can laugh, I had never been in a bar before. 2 or 3 black strangers approached me. Hey man, dig this whitey. They pressed up against my body. Look at these dirty white hands. They held up my fingers for all to see, as if they were explosive missiles about to ignite the semi-lit bar that surrounded us. I felt intimidated and amused. White fingers, I had never really looked at them that way before. I must have passed somebody's test because my test in my first exposure to reverse racism, because a few days later I was on my way to New Orleans, feeling a strange mix of anxiety and naivete. A few months earlier, M.L. King, who supported but did not participate in the rides, had said, quote, "You must keep your resistance on the highest level of dignity and discipline. Freedom riders must develop the quiet courage of dying for a cause," close quote. Looking back on it now, in terms of my anxiety and naivete, I was probably better off not having heard the second part of M.L. King's statement. Around the time that my clothes were absorbed with sweat in New Orleans, according to the U.S. News and World Report, the Kennedy administration was absorbed in honoring Ayub Khan of Pakistan. Quote, 4 yachts carried 140 guests down the Potomac to the White House. Strolling musicians, a symphony orchestra, marching troops in colonial uniform. Camelot. July 30th, no strolling magicians on the train to Jackson, just passengers and FBI agents. In those days, you could spot Hoover's men a block away, clean-cut, white shirts and ties, like bicycling missionary Mormons on Main Street. Jackson, the porter called. We didn't have to be told. When you're at a crossroad, about to do something that will have a profound effect on you and others, you know where to disembark, even if you're not quite ready. The corridor to the train terminal seemed unending, and the marble floor reverberated with the sound of shoes, as if they were echoing our march towards an act of conscience. There were whispers, a few attempts to break the tension. I remember the alternating rhythm of my heartbeat and the mind's measure. Stay cool, the sweating palms. Move quicker. There's the door to the waiting room. We split up. The white and black women moved together in one direction. We men, black and white together, moved in another. I had a lump in my throat, sensing Bob's anxiety as he watched Helen disappear. Have you ever felt weak-kneed, anxious to sit, yet ready to run at the same time? Thank God, they are the police, I thought to myself. Then I saw their determined faces and batons, and was struck with the realization that they were not there as our honor guard. The authorities had already arrested 300 Freedom Riders in Jackson that summer of '61. The police, in stony silence, stood like a wall, while the FBI agents melted away in the afternoon heat. Actually, I had not expected to see them in person. In '61, black churches in Alabama had not yet been burned. Schwerner, Goodman, and Sweeney had not yet been murdered. Mississippi wasn't burning, just smoldering. And Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General of the United States, was yet to learn of Hoover's macho misuse of power. All the anticipation, the queasy fear of the unknown that I had been feeling suddenly disappeared as the raucous voice of Captain Ray bellowed, "Are y'all going to move on? Y'all going to move on?" He said it one more time. "Then do you hear me?" We remained seated. "Black and white together," he sang. Nobody moved. Just like a tree that's planted in the water, we shall not be moved. Okay, line up, line up. Into the paddy wagons we proudly went, then scrunched together the civil rights anthem. We shall overcome someday, rang out through barred windows as strange towns on the way to the Delta flew by. Singing provides a sense of solidarity in the face of what seems incomprehensible. Hank Thomas, whom you may have seen on Oprah's show and in the PBS documentary, The Freedom Rides, described the bus burning in Anniston during which he thought he was going to die. Thomas set the example for how singing can be an instrument of individual and common resolve. When Deputy Tyson threatened us Freedom Riders in the cell block, all I know is if you boys don't stop singing, you're going to be singing in the rain, meaning we would be hosed down in our cells. Thomas mocked him with a new stanza of the old labor song, "Which side are you on?" "Oh, big man deputy," Tyson said, "I don't want to cause you pain, but if you don't stop that singing now, you'll be singing in the rain." Personally, I am no fan of the polarization epitomized in the words, "What side are you on?" Being a liberal means that one is open to the transformative power of change, aware that when change comes to resolving the complexities of peace, justice, and civil liberties, the line between conservative and liberal are not black and white. They're not simple. Between 1954 and 74, the late Senator Ervin of North Carolina was the most talented legal defender of Jim Crow laws and racial segregation in the Congress. But he was also remembered as a great civil libertarian for his work on the investigative committees that brought down Senator Joseph McCarthy in '54, and especially his investigation in 1972 of the Watergate scandal that, as we all know, led to President Nixon's resignation 2 years later. Nevertheless, being a liberal, as many of you know, in the face of injustice and suffering, also means there are times when you have to take a stand. And that summer in the segregated South, the fear of change and the demand for justice were like two unwavering vehicles clashing head on. I was on the way to jail. We all knew it would happen. But there's the naive part of you that is thinking, perhaps sanity will somehow reign. But the singing marches you back to what happened. I sat down next to friends, some black, some white, on a brown bench. Then, before the sun had set, in the human heat and passion of three unequal views, Southern law, justice, and the call to conscience, I was fingerprinted, photographed, and placed behind bars in the Hinds County Jail. July 61, U.S. News and World Report, quote, "Ride on the lonely Autobahn to Berlin, and you never know a crisis was building at the end of the road," close quote. The beginning of our legal road was our arraignment in the Jackson City Municipal Court, a court of non-record, which meant that no stenographic record would be available for the trial. Nevertheless, the Mississippi State Legislature had voted to up our misdemeanor crime to a sentence of 6 months, or 4 months and $200. In the land of the free and the brave, sitting on a bench, we were political prisoners, charged with a breach of the peace and sent to a state penitentiary. It's hard to believe that such a thing could happen in America. But now, 50 years later, I can still pace a 12 by 6 space with my eyes closed. As you would expect, although I kind of remember my naivete being surprised, we were segregated in jail. And the authorities had actually put 23 of our black colleagues in one 6 by 9 cell with no air except for what got through the crack of the bottom of a heavy steel door. Somehow, Bob and my other friends survived. On one side of the maximum security unit, we also sang. On our side of the maximum security unit, we also sang. My favorite is this ditty. What side are you on, boy? What side are you on? Listen to me, fellows, and tell me where you stand. Will you be an Uncle Tom, or will you be a man? Don't listen to Mr. Charlie, don't listen to his lies. Us black folks, we don't have a chance unless we organize. What side are you on, boy? What side are you on? I only spent one half of my time singing with the others in the maximum security unit because upon our arrival at the 28,000 acre penitentiary, we whites were housed in a barrack-type dormitory. And there I met the 40 other men who were to be my constant companions for the first 3 weeks of my sojourn. Here we were allowed freedom of movement except at night, when we were warned to stay away from the barred windows, lest it appear we were attempting a breakout and be shot by the patrolling guards. My colleagues were a fascinating collection of individuals. I emphasize individuals. So varied in outlook and background were we that our discussions, which sometimes began at 5 in the morning and went on until late at night, would range from how to organize a union, to a lecture on a fish named Candiro, a discussion on Israel, or the real lowdown on the boxing game by a New Yorker who had fought in the Golden Glove contest. We were not all students. At least 10 were over 25, some married with children. We were religiously diverse. 17 Protestants, 16 Jews, 8 Catholics, 3 Quakers, 4 atheists, and naturally a few who declined to stay. While we prisoners were looking at each other, the August issue of Time magazine reported that the cost for looking at a Magnavox 23-inch TV was, anybody have a guess? $199.50. A Goodyear tire cost $15.95. Liz Taylor, 28, married Eddie Fisher, 33. And Eleanor Roosevelt celebrated her 77th birthday. After 3 weeks in the barracks, the warden came to tell us that there was now room for us in the maximum security unit, and he would be glad to make accommodations for us there, where we would join the other Freedom Riders, if we wished. We knew he was playing with us, as he would put us where he wanted. But we called a meeting and voted unanimously, a first in itself, to tell the warden he could book us at MSU. A compact brick building that appeared to rise out of the ground. It comprised 4 cell blocks with 13 cells per block, 2 prisoners to a cell. It was surrounded by a 20-foot high fence, 4 concrete posts topped with barbed wire, which could be mounted with machine guns. Every door that opened to the cell block could only be opened by a guard from the outside with a key to the electric control box. 4:30 every morning and afternoon, the guards would come down the corridor shaking every cell door. Each cell had a wash basin, a toilet, and a double steel bunk bed with mattresses. The women were in a separate cell block, only 30 feet from the gas chamber. On one occasion, they too had their mattresses taken away because they refused to stop singing. For most of us, the threat to remove mattresses was a test of moral fortitude. Singing meant a choice, sleeping on steel or on an 1.5-inch thick straw mattress. Giving up our mats deprived us of our one physical comfort, but left us with a sense of collective purpose, sacrifice, and resolve, spiritual ingredients that contributed, like singing, to our survival in a hostile environment. All the prisoners wore distinct clothing. The trustees, prisoners with the highest echelon of prison life, wore trousers that were striped vertically, and some were allowed to carry guns. The regular run of prisoners had horizontally striped pants. We wore shorts stamped with the letters MSU on our cotton rears. The trustees also had conjugal rights once a month with their visiting spouses. I love to tell people that because we all have a stereotype of conservative Mississippi, but in some ways they were very progressive. The rumor was they dealt with any sexual appetite we had by putting something called saltpeter in our food. In fact, we were not allowed any privileges such as purchase of items at the prison store, no packages or visitors, with the exception of a Catholic priest who visited and Rabbi Perry Nussbaum, whose congregation was in Jackson and who made a weekly trip of 260 miles to visit any freedom rider who requested a visit. He also sent a form letter to our relatives after each visit and supplied us with a prayer book and an army Bible, which the guards let us keep. I wonder if the good rabbi knew the quote from Matthew in the Second Testament, quote, "For when I was in prison, you came to visit me," close quote. Though I am sure Rabbi Nussbaum knew that in many southern courts there were Jim Crow Bibles, one with the word white printed on it and the other printed color. A few weeks ago, the American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati surprised me with a letter my mother wrote on August the 6th, 1961, to Rabbi Nussbaum. My mother used to type my papers in college. As I typed some of her words for this talk, I felt her presence, reminding me how much we are the products of those who love us. Quote, "Believe me when I say, Rabbi Nussbaum, that I admire your courage more than I do that of my son and his friends, who faced only the loss of 39 days, while you faced the social pressures of your community. I have faith that God will reward you for your commandments, your mitzvah. I realize that these are only words and that you must live with the reality of the situation. Nonetheless, I also realize that what most of us say are only words, and it is only in their living that the mitzvah commandments become reality. I admire men who practice what they preach. They do so under difficulty. That they do so under difficulty makes it even all the more impressive." She continued, "It is easier for us here, I think, where the cool, clean air blows in daily from the Pacific, driving away the stale odors of our humanity, than it is where you must live in the actual and emotional climate of your daily round. That you are willing to drive these long miles every Thursday is to me the living reality of what our prophets preached, and you are practicing." Rabbi Cohen, a San Diego colleague of Nussbaum's, said, "This is about Phil, but I think it applies more to you," close quote. And of course, she was right. Nussbaum, who I had the honor of having speak in Riverside years later, made that trip on a lonely road by himself. And people knew what he was doing. Eventually, as you may know, his home was bombed, and in 1968 or 69, he left Jackson and moved to San Diego. Unlike many of the other earlier freedom riders, the media was being attentive to those of us imprisoned in Mississippi, which no doubt protected us from any violence, but not the petty harassment. For example, for the first 2 weeks, we were allowed about 20 minutes to finish a meal. Then one evening, the guards came and took our plates after about 5 minutes. This meant we had to gulp down our meals, which in some ways was advisable. The food was edible, though highly starchy, and the evening meal was a rehash of the noon meal served cold. A typical meal was sweet or white potatoes, beans, fatback, not exactly kosher, and white pasty bread, perfect for molding into chess pieces. And as a matter of fact, in some of the new civil rights museums, they actually have some of those chess pieces that some very creative freedom rider artists made in prison. There were little, if any, fresh vegetables or fruit, and many of us left prison with bloody gums. caused by a lack of vitamin C, what sailors know as scurvy. U.S. News and World Report, July, carried articles titled, quote, "An inside look at the world's trouble spots." Mississippi wasn't included. And the magazine also reported, quote, "In Moscow, Khrushchev tells Reds to eat more horse meat," close quote. Obviously, I was doing time, not reading it. And while the Russians were eating off the hook, most freedom riders, especially we non-Southerners, were flushing our toilets with that glutinous, gluey stuff called okra. You could hear one toilet after the other flush down. The most difficult harassment to endure was the prison authorities' delay of our release. Our emotional survival was enhanced by dreaming of one's return to all the people and things we missed. I remember the corridor to our cells ringing out with descriptions of what we most longed for. For me, it was a girlfriend's kiss, a hamburger with fries and a chocolate malt, the freedom to go to a movie. One's all-consuming fear was that someone would screw up and bail would not be posted. And until you knew that it was like waiting to be told you don't have some terrible disease. As the time drew near, when one of us was to be released, the cell block would become abnormally quiet as hope, fear, and empathy coalesced on the turn of a key whose power for freedom was not ours. I was lucky. I only had one day after the time that CORE had indeed posted my bail. But there were those who were held in prison as long as 5 days after they were supposed to be released. 2 months before I got to inhale the breath of freedom, Newsweek reported that a Gallup poll of June 27 showed that, quote, "A majority of Americans, 57%, believe that such tactics as sit-ins and freedom rides hurt rather than help the Negro's chances for integration in the South," close quote. It has been a half a century since that Gallup poll reflected white attitudes about racism, change, and social justice. And having just returned from our 50th reunion in Jackson, I saw and felt the hugs of love and appreciation given to us from both the black and the white community. Things have certainly changed, as exemplified by Governor Barber's breakfast for us at the governor's mansion, where he apologized for our arrest. Parenthetically, I should tell you that some of my colleagues did not go to Jackson because of Governor Barber, which I think was a big mistake, because they missed an opportunity to dialogue with the guy. There are now 23 black senators in the state legislature, and a black warden at Parchment, where after I again paced the 6x12 cell, instead of fatback and okra, we were fed the best barbecue I have ever tasted. As you may know, last month, Oprah Winfrey brought us Freedom Riders to Chicago to be on her show. Since then, I have been asked, did she give you anything? Did you get the big car? The trip to Australia? Yes, she gave us this well-written book by Raymond Arsenault called The Freedom Rides. At the end of the book, the historian writes, "In the process of delivering the movement's message of nonviolence, the Freedom Riders became experiential learners, acquiring truth about themselves and the human condition. Wherever they found themselves, on buses, in terminal waiting rooms, in mass meetings, in the jails and prisons of the benighted South, they absorbed the concrete lessons of struggle. Some were hard and sobering lessons about the intractability of racial hatred and entrenched privilege. But others were hopeful and inspiring, demonstrating the expansive possibilities of individual and collective action, close quote. The historian is correct. We who choose to risk life and limb absorb the lessons of struggle, together with sobering lessons about racism and privilege. But for me, the lessons learned also have to do with enduring patience, to see the struggle through and not give up hope. As we just heard, keep walking for freedom. As taught by my 2,000-year-old social action mentor, Rabbi Tarfon, quote, "It's not up to you to finish a task all by yourself, but neither are you so free that you can desist from trying to make a difference." And now, 50 years older, I am not only grateful to have survived, but to live at a time when so many throughout the world oppose racism, hatred, and bigotry, where at this very moment in the Middle East, some are singing their freedom songs and dying for the right and fight to live lives of freedom and dignity. N.L. King once wrote, "The ultimate aim of our struggle is, quote, to create better relations with our opponent than defeat and humiliate him," close quote. To have survived defeat, humiliation, and suffering, as we all know, is often a matter of fortitude and sheer good luck. What side are you on, boy? What side are you on? They tell me him and Jackson, there are no neutrals yet. You either a freedom rider or a Tom for Governor Ross Barnett. My father was a freedom fighter, and a freedom fighter's son is I. And I'm going to keep on fighting here until the day I die. What side are you on, boy? What side are you on?
Thank you very much. Now you're willing to take some questions.
Let me take questions.
All right.
Baruch.
Rabbi, what was the official attitude of the various churches and synagogues vis-a-vis the freedom riders?
That's an easy question. Not a big surprise. Indifference, antagonism, hostility. This is why it was so incredible that Nussbaum, I kind of get teary-eyed, drove up from Jackson. He took tremendous heat from his congregational board. Rabbi Mattenbaum, who was also in Hattiesburg, had his house burned, and eventually he had to flee the South. In terms of the churches, most of them, again, were angry, as was, the white South. And so there was this incredible tension between black African Americans and their churches and the churches of the white South. But I have to say that when you read Arsenault's excellent book, he, very upfront talks about quite a few black churches that, were not very happy with CORE's decision to sponsor the Freedom Rides, as was true with the NAACP in large part. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund eventually decided that they would support us and help us legally, but they weren't real thrilled about, what they construed as adding oil to the fire of segregation. So it's a very important issue, and that's why I think it's pretty terrific that, I got to see such change when I was in Mississippi.
I got one here.
Although the issues have certainly changed over the last 50 years, has the thought, why do they call it the United States of America, come to your mind?
Is that a rhetorical question, or? Well, you know, I mean, this takes us to the issue of the Civil War, or the war between the states, or the hostility between Hamilton and Jefferson. I mean, you know, democracy in the states was a complex entity, and particularly Jefferson and Hamilton totally disagreed on this whole issue of union and states' rights. And so, you know, the South was exemplifying a long tradition, very strongly sponsored by Jefferson, of states' rights. And so it was easy for them to, you know, then continue this idea and attach it to issues of segregation. So I personally am glad that I'm a Yankee, and would like to think that had I been a rabbi at the time, I would have been a clergy person with the Northern Army in the South. But, you know, the United States, thank God, is united now because a lot of people died in that terrible Civil War. But those old feelings don't die, as we all know.
I believe it's interesting that we have to come all the way down to Ajijic to hear a speaker of this quality. So thank you so much. And I would commend you and encourage you to keep singing when you give your talk. It's a very magical and wonderful part. And also, I think it's a piece of a length that would be very good to put in the school systems. I'm really big on in the States, I don't think there's enough that's fairly short and concise that's written by a human being. And I would encourage you to try and get this published in the school systems.
Others? Here we have.
Just one question. It seems, I'm not American, obviously, but it seems to me that I think it's easier to improve upon things that are obvious, like black and white. But to me, there's so many other bridges that just get ignored because of culture or religion that are probably even worse. What, do you think there's going to be an improvement in other things that are not quite as obvious?
Well, I'm no mumche, I'm no expert about social change. So I really don't know that I have an answer. I hope. I really do believe, for example, that eventually the Israelis and the Palestinians are going to get it together. The Catholics and the Protestants did. It took a long, long time. So I think eventually things will happen. And, you know, all the social commentators, Fareed Zakaria, if you don't listen to him, you're missing a great commentator, you know, talks a lot about what's happening now with this incredible social communications network. I mean, we all know that what happened in Egypt and in Tunisia would not have happened had it not been for Facebook and all of that stuff. So I think that kind of stuff, you know, is going to definitely help. But I also believe that, no big surprise, that we all got to keep walking. So, you know, as a social activist, I spend some time every day looking at those appeals that come to me from my liberal social action movements and encourage me to sign on to this or send this to this cause or that cause. I do it. I try to spend time doing it because I really believe what Rabbi Tarfon taught us. It's not up to you to finish a task all by yourself, but neither are you free, so free that you can just, you know, sit back and do nothing. So I do believe that change will take place if people, you know, continue to be activists in their own way. And by the way, in all fairness, I say that to conservatives as well. You know, I happen to be a proud liberal, but the main thing is to be involved in a healthy way, meaning in an open way, the way M.L. King basically was to change. Thanks.
We watched the Oprah Winfrey Show, and we also watched the special that was on a Sunday night. And I'm just curious, how did she find you to invite you to come to that show and the other Freedom Riders?
Well, I wrote her and told her I'm coming.
But I mean,
How
did she find everybody?
No, I apologize. Good question. Because of Arsenal and also I forget the name of the stupid commission in Mississippi. It was kind of like the Mississippi FBI. They went out of business about 14 years ago, but they had a Hoover there, you know, and we were, obviously our mug shots, they all went to this commission, and there were literature and documents preserved about all the Freedom Riders. And so when that commission, that's such an interesting name, when they went out of business, their documentation went to civil rights organizations throughout the United States, including the great job that's done at Jackson State. I just gave about this much literature to Jackson State to be in their archives.
Did you get a phone call or letter or?
Okay, so you're right. It didn't really, no, you're right. Okay, so what happened was because of the documentation, Freedom Riders began about 2 years ago an organized website thing. What do you call it? Where we all exchange the blog, right? Change information. So that's really the answer to your question. So we about 9 months ago, or 7 months ago, we were told that Oprah had decided that she was going to invite us all to Chicago. It was a very complex issue because at the time there was the conference that was going to take place in Jackson and then one in Washington, D.C. And there were all these political exchanges between Freedom Riders about, you know, which one was the appropriate one. And of course, as I said to you, some of my colleagues refused to go to Jackson because Barbara was a part of the process. So the answer is the blog and the archival information about Freedom Riders. So you can go on and type Freedom Rider's name and you can see his mugshot on the computer.
I'd like to mention a country like South Africa. I grew up during the apartheid era in South Africa and lived through what was going on, excuse me, the injustice. We took it for granted. That was our way of life. South Africa is pretty far away from, if you can call it, civilization. I'm heartbroken at how things have developed in South Africa, because in spite of doing away with apartheid, it's still not a happy place. But one has to keep an open mind. They say what goes around comes around. And our forefathers were not very kind. There were some dreadful atrocities. So we can't expect everything to just fall into place. There's still so much that has to be worked through. And well, we can only hope that eventually it will, because it is such a lovely country. But thank you very much, because I think this is a theme that occurs in so many of our colonial countries that are still trying to find their feet.
Well, thank you for your comments. You all didn't take it for granted either, by the way, in apartheid South Africa. Wonderful people like Helen Sussman, and you're right though, my heart cries for Nelson Mandela. You know, what he must be feeling about what's not happening. But what he did, and with Archbishop Tutu, the Reconciliation Commission, I don't know how you feel about this, but I think that alone was such an incredible contribution to society. If only the Palestinians and the Israelis someday would do that, you know, to bring people together and say, all you got to do is give testimony, admit that you were guilty, and we accept your apology. That contribution alone in South Africa is such a wonderful contribution. So, you know, but you're right. You got to hope. Thanks.
I lived in Baton Rouge during the time you're describing, and we went through many of these same kinds of problems. But I'm wondering, in your perspective, what do you, the 27 senators in the Mississippi legislature. What was the tipping point? What happened that sort of moved the bar over?
Well, it's an interesting question for me, as Luke, my honey, knows. I've kind of gone through a little evolution on this. I was really quite embarrassed in Jackson at the love that we were given. I signed 100 autographs, you know, and I'm saying, hey, you know, I just did one little tiny thing. I don't really deserve this. But I have to say that when you listen to Southerners talk about the Freedom Riders and the Freedom Ride movement as a catalyst for change, I have to admit it was more significant than I was willing to acknowledge. But for me, the real heroes are Shawnee, Sweeney, Goodman, and all the other voter rights activists who were out there in the Delta alone doing voter registration. And eventually, that's what made the difference. Because now African Americans vote in states like Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, etc. So if you ask me what pushed the bar, I think the civil rights movement and fortunately the NAACP did get with the voter registration thing, but thank God for SNCC, through the Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and Corbin, because they showed such guts in terms of, you know, being out there taking that risk, knocking on a door in Clarksville or someplace where they were so vulnerable. And as we know, Schwerner, Sweeney, and Goodman and others paid their life, with their lives. When we were at the reunion, we got to visit Emmett Till's place where he, you know, so many incredible people who just showed such courage. So I think the courage and the political will to make change pushed the bar.
In the back.
I'm a longtime member of the Southern Poverty Law Center, and there is, as you should well know, the Civil Rights Memorial that is there at the Southern Poverty Law Center. Would you talk about it for just a moment so some people can know that there is that resource and know some of these other names, the three men and Yola Liuzzo and Emmett Till and such that are memorialized there?
Well, first of all, really interesting. I mean, Mississippi and I think Alabama are both, especially Mississippi, doing a lot of tourist business stuff in terms of commemorating markers, putting these beautiful markers where civil rights activists died and or lived and did great things. So that kind of what, you know, but the Poverty Law Center is a great institution and does marvelous legal work, and that's the kind of organization people should support, not only to preserve the memory of Evers and Emmett Till and lots of other people who died, but also because they're involved in present contemporary civil rights legislation stuff, doing the stuff that needs to be done. I have to say that we heard the Assistant Attorney General in Jackson, and he said very strongly, he said, we are appointing not just people who did something for the Bush campaign or for the Clinton campaign or for the Obama campaign. We're appointed people now to the Attorney General's Office for Civil Rights who are knowledgeable about civil rights and civil liberties. And I was very impressed to hear that. So hopefully that'll make it.
My granddaughters grew up in the military, playing with blacks and Asians and whoever was there. They're not going to be subject to these same fears that my mother had and that I'm getting over. Although my mother discovered when they united a black and a white Methodist congregation that these people were just like her. Now in Minnesota, we at one time had a program where we contributed, a lot of us contributed funds, and some of us became adoptive parents for the summer for a child from Northern Ireland. And these children came to Minnesota and South Dakota. I don't know if this was a Midwest, I don't know how big this program was. And sometimes the Catholic children lived with Protestants and vice versa. But not very often. But they did find Catholic neighbors next door and Protestant neighbors across the street. And this certainly affected them. And I've heard since of situations where they took, I remember one place where they took, I think it was Jews from Israel, sent them to Sweden to spend a couple months. Now, I think we need to get at these children much longer. And the thing is, we all hate each other until we get acquainted. And then once we get to know somebody, we find out, you know, those fears are really not necessary.
What is that song from South Pacific about? Yeah, be carefully. Hey, right. Absolutely, that kind of dialogue stuff is really important. And the amigo Baruch will tell you that that there are Palestinian and Israeli organizations right now who are bringing young people together to dialogue and to get to know each other. It's getting a little harder now, but that stuff still goes on.
I'm going to make the last comment.
Right.
I get extra credit for being at the front end of the movement, because we all know as time went on, it had a stimulating effect, and many people made it happen. But you were, it sounds like, among the very first. And then since then, it was an example that other people could organize to end the war, gay rights, women's rights. We don't do so much organizing in the streets now, although I guess the gay rights movement has shown otherwise recently. But we still have wars to end and other business, and it doesn't seem like there's an adequate response. But thank you for your work and for the model you set for so many things that happened later.
Thank you so much.